Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Cindy, and to the team at MNP for your sponsorship, and also thank you, Minister Robinson, for your comments. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to say I'm very grateful to join you on the traditional and unceded territory of the CLAC people. Thank you for allowing us to assemble on your land this week. And I'm delighted to moderate this discussion about the future of the workforce. Everybody in this room understands that the labour force challenge is the key challenge that employers face today. I can tell you from the BC Chamber of Commerce, we represent 100 chambers of commerce and boards of trade across the province, and together we represent 36,000 small, medium and large businesses from every sector and from every region across BC. And I can tell you from our survey work and from our day-to-day conversations that the labour force challenge and how to plan for the future is the number one issue that keeps them awake at night. So I'm delighted to be moderating this conversation. Now, you know, as a skilled audience, that the labour shortage that we're in is not new. It's been exacerbated by the pandemic. You also know that it's not a niche issue because it can affect entry-level positions, and it can also stretch all the way through to C-suite positions, although today we are focused on the skilled labour within the natural resources sector. And it's not easy to resolve. Otherwise, it would have been a long time ago. There's no single solution, and there's no single entity responsible for securing that solution or solutions. So when the panel and I came together just before Christmas to plan this conversation, the question was, what can we possibly share with this audience that they don't already know? Because you're living and breathing the shortage and planning for the future every day of the week. So we went back to the forum's goal for this year, which is to be focused on how BC is contributing to an innovative, responsible and respectful international natural resource sector. And our goal, therefore, for the next hour is to share our perspectives on a long-standing issue by applying innovative and new thinking. So that includes asking the tough questions. What can we do better? What actions can we be taking that we haven't taken so far? What kind of policies do we need in place? Who can we learn from so that we're not reinventing the wheel? And I can tell you that in the next hour, you're going to hear about the importance of education, right through from K-12 to post-secondary. You're going to hear about the importance of on-the-job training, upskilling, micro-credentials. You're going to hear about different delivery mechanisms. You're also going to hear about the need to change our workplace because it needs to be different than it was pre-COVID in particular. And we're going to double down on the importance of collaboration. We've heard a lot about the need to partner across public, private, Indigenous peoples, not-for-profit, labour, etc., etc. That is absolutely true, and we need to start now. Stop the talking, let's move, let's take action. So with that, thank you, Minister, for introducing our panel. So I'm going to turn to Shelley, Patrick, Cara and Wayne, and we're going to get this conversation started. So welcome everybody, good to see you. I know that this conversation is going to be thoughtful, it's going to be candid, it's going to be provocative, and provocative is okay, because that's when we are forced to think. And as moderator, my challenge is going to be squeezing in as many questions as I can over the next hour. I have some pre-prepared questions, but also if you would like to contribute questions, please jump onto Hoover, and I'll get to as many of them as I can between now and approximately 4 o'clock. So with that, let's get going. So to the panel, we have a very knowledgeable audience, we have bright minds on the stage, and we don't have a whole lot of time. So with that in mind, let's start with the end in mind. We know what's broken because we're experiencing it. So let's talk about solutions. And then we can reverse engineer the conversation to chat about how we're going to make those solutions come to life. So, start with you, Shelley, and we'll just go right along the line. So imagine if you had a magic genie in a bottle, and if you were granted one wish to resolve the labor force challenges that we have and the future that we're trying to create, what would that one wish be and why?
Love it. Love the question. So, as Minister Robinson so well laid out the challenges, and when you think about the future, when we think about from a skilled trades perspective, we still see very low numbers of women in trades, diversity in trades. When you think about 51% of the population, and yet it's less than 7% that is participating in these careers, there's a lot of work to do. And we see in our reports and some of our studies we do the amount of discrimination and racism and sexism that still exists in the workplace. So when you're living in a time where the labor force challenge is everywhere, in every sector, and you're all competing for the biggest and the brightest, we need to really think about how we're going to address that and change that if we really want to make a difference to close this labor gap.
Thank you very much for the question. In terms of the genie, I would ask her to fully maximize the inclusion of underrepresented groups into the skilled trades. Now, I know that we don't have a genie and it's up to us to do the work, but I do strongly believe that underrepresented groups in the trades are going to play a critically important role in dealing with the current shortage and, more importantly, the future shortage. And as we take on that challenge, I think, you know, we've seen attempts made through the use of temporary foreign workers to little success. We've now heard policy discussion around more permanent immigration policies to address these shortages. But I think as Canadians, if we're not willing to access and leverage the existing labor pool that we have, I think we're missing out on an incredible opportunity. And from my perspective, I think we have to be steadfast in our focus when we're talking about careers in the trades, that it is careers that we're talking about. The men and women that are retiring out of the trades today committed to careers in those industries. And so the solution is not going to be a revolving door of people coming in and out of the industry. We have to establish workplaces, and specifically workplaces for underrepresented groups that are going to reflect back themselves and attract them and make it clear that a career is an option, and that's going to be the only way out. People have to be looking at it as a career and not just as a job.
Good distinction, thank you. Cara.
Thank you. I would say removing the barriers for Indigenous and women entering the workforce, especially in the mining industry. Just carrying on some of the comments that were already made, certainly there is racism that happens in workplaces, and it's about changing the workplace culture, and how can we do that collectively, and not just employers, but also it's a responsibility from community perspective as well, including training providers and associations. Thank you.
Thank you, Cara. And last but not least, Wayne.
Thank you, Fiona. Very quickly, first, by way of introduction, just in case you're not familiar with who CLAC is, that's a real privilege for me to be here on behalf of CLAC and our 60,000 members across the country. We are a union. We're a diversified union, so we represent workers in a lot of different sectors, but we're largest in construction. Of our 60,000 members, about 45,000 of them are involved in the skilled trades, in the construction and related industries, and of those, about 30,000 are in Western Canada, and of those, just over 13,000 here in BC, and of those, about 10,000 are directly involved in the resource sector. So that's where my voice is coming from. And if the question is to identify one wish that's the end point, my wish would have 3 components to it, and I'll cover them quickly and then we'll elaborate. First is that we would have found a way to very effectively deliver education and training using technology and whatever other resources we have to remote communities. If you look at the numbers, people who live in remote communities, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, they are underrepresented in the industry, and their completion rates in the skilled trades are very low. And if you dig into the reasons for that, it's because we're not delivering the training to where they need to receive it. The other thing is that we would have learned how to maximize or optimize the potential and capacity of our current workforce. Yeah, we're going to talk a lot today about how do we bring new people into the industry. We also have to talk about how to, as I said, optimize the capacity of the tens of thousands of people who are already skilled, already working in the industry, by giving them additional skills, or multi-skilling, as we refer to it. We can increase the capacity of our current workforce. And the third component of that place where we will finally arrive is when governments stop interfering with labor markets. The labor market is a diverse and competitive landscape, and it is altogether unhelpful when governments stick their long fingers into the labor market and interfere with the free dynamic of competition. And so when the governments stay in their lane as it relates to labor markets, that'll be a good time.
Thank you, Wayne. So to the audience, you'll see me making lots of notes because I scribble furiously when I'm listening to these folks because I'm going to jump off on some points. And I also want to stress, this is not a discussion per se, this is a free-flowing conversation. So I would invite the panelists to jump on each other's comments and expand whatever you feel, and we will get, I can see the questions even beginning to clock up already, so, and good questions they are. So thank you for your wish, your one wish. So let's reverse engineer those wishes into how are we going to make that happen. So, Shelley, if I can start with you once again. So, as you lead the SkilledTradesBC, you're responsible for coordinating and for regulating skill training in BC. Patrick spoke to it. Of course, we need new people to come into the country, but surely we must need to double down on training as many folks who call BC home as possible. How is that working? Can we do better? How can we improve?
Yeah, it's a complicated question in so many ways, and some of what Minister Robinson spoke to is some of the discussions that are having in the post-secondary about how do we make sure that people are moving into careers that align best with their skill sets so they can reach their full potential. And I think, within the post-secondary side, there's a confluence of events happening. People are thinking about value for time in their education and lifelong learning, and the post-secondary sector is certainly thinking about that as well in terms of where does micro-credentials fit in, part-time studies, online studies, and I think we all have to get used to the fact that lifelong learning is the future. It's not just about a 4-year whatever, apprenticeship in our case, or a degree in others, and that's it. And maybe down the road somebody does something else. It's a lifelong learning, and there's a lot more opportunities than ever before. And some of the other points that Wayne made and everything else is thinking differently about that learning. From an apprenticeship perspective, it's about community-based learning, doing things, local, and helping to support people where they're at. So those types of things are all active conversations. I think back to some of your original comments as well, Fiona, it's about partnership and us all working together to figure out what makes sense in this instance versus another, and then building something from there.
And really good points, Shelley, and if I can jump on that, you've triggered a thought for me. to make education accessible to everyone in every community, north, south, east, and west of BC. We need high-speed internet in the north. And it's not the case today. And we're working at it from a BC Chamber perspective. We're urging the government to expedite putting that connection in place, because it impacts communities, it impacts businesses, it impacts the ability to get business done. And if we're really and truly serious about upping the ante and coming out of COVID, building our economy and being truly competitive, surely high-speed internet is one of the pieces of infrastructure that we need to have in place now or very soon, and not 2027. So we've got your back, and we're going to continue to advocate for that. Patrick, I want to jump to you for a second. So your organization is an organization of individuals who have chosen a career in the skilled trades. Shelley spoke about the importance of education. What other resources, in your perspective, need to be leveraged or explored or created in order to attract folks to the workforce and have the support that they need?
Thank you for that question. From my perspective, I think we need to be honest in terms of where we are with respect to our underrepresented groups in the construction industry in the province of British Columbia. Most of the research places Indigenous participation in construction, in and around 5 to 6%. Female participation in construction, around 6%. There's studies out there that'll have those.
Thank you.
There's studies out there that'll have those numbers higher. But once you back out administrative, managerial type positions, those numbers drop right off. And so, for both of those underrepresented groups, we're at in and around 6%. And so for me, that presents an incredible upside to addressing that challenge. And I think we have to take advantage of that. Making the construction industry a welcoming sector for those individuals to find a career, I think, has to be our main focus. And to Cara's point, that's only going to be accomplished by taking down barriers that are preventing them from either accessing the industry or staying in the industry. And so from my perspective, a really good example is one we're working with one of our employers on right now. And collaboratively, we've taken a two-prong approach to it. One is specifically priority hiring. If you are from an underrepresented group and you have the skills that are necessary for the job vacancy, priority number one goes to that underrepresented individual, and they're brought into the workplace. That's the first prong. The second prong is, again, to Cara's point, removing those barriers in the workplace. And so the solution, and what we're here talking about today are solutions. The solution that we look to for this is an in-depth 8-hour course on the first day of employment for all of the employees that come to work for this employer. The first 4 hours of this course is on the Indian Act, the history of contact to present day, and then more importantly, a local knowledge sharer is engaged from the nation where the work is going to be done, and they participate in that first portion of the course. They're sharing their experiences with all of the employees that are coming onto that project. And that's critically important, I think, in order to bring down those barriers. The next 4 hours of that course are going to be, dealing with equity, inclusion, and diversity in the workplace. And so every single employee has to go through that on their first day of employment. And so, an 8-hour course, there may be individuals in this room calculating out the cost of putting on that course right now as we speak. But we have to ask ourselves, what is the cost of upskilling, job-ready an individual, bring them into the workforce, and then have that entire investment leave when they decide that the work culture is one that they just are not willing to participate in. So where's the cost to that? So that's really what ourselves and our employer have looked at and decided to make that investment in changing the workplace culture. And I think that's going to be a critical piece to it. And so, you know, what we're seeing coming out of the jobs, though, the job numbers, participation of Indigenous, 15%, participation of women, 10%. These are improvements. There's much more work to be done, but these are improvements. So to me, when we're having a conversation around solutions, this is something that I think needs to be shared because it's that level of commitment to bringing down those barriers. But I think it's also important for the audience to understand that, you know, this is not just an IUOE Local 115 contractor. This is the British Columbia infrastructure benefits. And all of the building trades throughout British Columbia participating in this initiative. And so from my perspective, if you have one non-Indigenous IUOE Local 115 member participate in this course, that is a small act of reconciliation. And as you have thousands and thousands of our members and new entrants into the industry participate in this course, that's thousands and thousands of small acts of reconciliation. And I think at the end of the day, that's going to be the only way towards changing the workplace culture. Every study you see, women and Indigenous groups, it's the workplace culture that shortens their careers. And so if we're not collectively willing to address that, then I can assure you we will not solve this problem.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you. Cara, I want to go to you. Based on your focus specifically on the mining industry, and that's an industry that's seen tremendous change over a generation, highly dependent now on technology, which is very complex. How does the mining sector look forward? What are you planning for the future? How are you attracting the individuals that you need? How are you training them? What are you training them for? Can you just share some insight on your sector's priorities? Thank you.
Sure. So I'm happy to say that the organization that I work with, CTEM, we had completed a really robust research project, and that was called the Skills Roadmap Project. And that included over 120 participants from across the province, including post-secondary institutions, labor, as well as employers across the province. And so what we focused on is what is happening in the industry. What are the future jobs looking like, and what are the types of skills and training that is needed to meet the future the future jobs, because it's changing. So innovation that's happening in the mining sector today is there's mining companies that are switching over to automation. So what does that mean? How can we meet with training providers and determine whether or not those programs that they deliver are actually meeting the needs of the mining sector within a particular region or within a particular community?
Well said, thank you. I was listening to you and I'm also looking at the questions, and we're going to get to the questions, folks. There's some really good ones, but before I do, I just want to wrap up with a quick conversation with Wayne. So Wayne, you have workers across many sites, across different companies and so on. We can't parachute in people through immigration tomorrow. We need to, and we're not able to train as many people as we can right out of the gate. So what can we do today and going forward to make the best use of our workforce today? How can we improve productivity, leverage the resources that we have?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think at the outset I should just draw a distinction between micro-credentialing and multi-skilling. We've used both terms, and what we are proposing, what we have already tried to do with our members, is not necessarily micro-credentialing, which typically involves breaking down, say, a career or a job into little bite-sized pieces and then doling it out. What we're doing with multi-skilling is taking a ticketed tradesperson who's, whatever trade it might be, and then enhancing their skill set by adding additional skills that they can use for a whole bunch of things. And I'll give you an example. This comes from Alberta, but we had scaffolders, lots of scaffolders who were working on projects. And then at a certain point in time, when the scaffolding was largely finished, they would crew down, and we were having a horrible time finding insulators. And so we thought, well, if we train scaffolders to do insulation work, we're solving a whole bunch of problems at once. We're keeping them working, they're continuing to earn a living, and we're, as I will keep saying, we're optimizing the capacity of that defined group of people. And so that's one example, and I think that if you look at all the trades, you could line them all up, and you could break down the various skill sets that exist in each trade, you find lots of overlap, which is to say that you could take tradespeople and just add certain little buckets of skill to their toolbox, and we believe that it gives them greater work opportunities, it keeps them working, it provides a more fulfilling work experience because they're doing a wider variety of things. So that's what we're referring to.
Awesome, thank you. We need to get to the questions because they're beginning to pile up. It's good though. So I'm going to go right off the top. There's a question. Seems to be a lack of interest from the younger generations to work in our industries, for example, mining, forestry, energy. What can we do to create awareness and interest of the sustainable and critically important job opportunities we have? This is a topic close to my heart. Who would like to jump in? Patrick?
I think this is one of those issues that with the tight labor market, I think it has affected the resource sector the most. There was a time in Canada where the resource sector, oftentimes because the work was remote in different locations, hard to access, the compensation associated with that work, the differential from the compensation in urban settings was so different that there was no issue of attracting people up to camp jobs. But what we're seeing now, and I see it every day, is that the compensation in urban settings is on par and at times above resource sector employers. And that's a real challenge that everyone needs to get their head around. And I mean, potentially not many people in this room may want to hear it, but the fact is, younger people have so many other options now. And so, when you can get a good pension, a good health and welfare plan, and an excellent wage rate in the city of Vancouver, going up to a remote camp job away from your family or preventing you from starting a family, those are the real challenges out there right now, and it's only exacerbated by the labor supply.
Cara, you look ready to say something. Jump in, please.
Yes. So another project that I'm working on is how do we attract Indigenous youth into the workforce? And so what was great is having questions for the youth. I mean, I'm way beyond being a youth, but it's great that we have an Indigenous Youth Advisory Council and asking them these questions. How do we reach them, and how do we communicate differently? Because the communication that we share amongst ourselves may be interpreted differently from a youth perspective.
I would also offer, having come from the construction industry needs to tell its story about the opportunities out there. Too often, a career in trades, I think, is perceived as a second best choice. And it is not a second best choice compared to a university career. We need, as employers, to tell our story. There's perceptions about poor career opportunities, poor remuneration, and it's dirty, it's cold, whether it's construction, whether it's mining, whatever. We need to bust those myths as an industry, or as industries, and get back to the K-12 students so that we're conditioning them almost at a very early stage, as opposed to try and convince them when they've already been conditioned by either school or parents or society. So I think we've got work to do as industry as well to tell a better story and make it more compelling. Shelley, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just had a couple other thoughts as well, just to build on what the other panelists have said. The reality is there's infrastructure projects, ongoing across Canada. I think I read something just yesterday that was 18 of the largest 100 are in BC, which means there's lots of opportunity elsewhere, and you don't get the same migration across Canada as you once had to also draw from. And when I think about, what can you do in terms of as an organization, and I'm not trying to be difficult about it, but I think you need to think about, take a look in the mirror and what have you done to help bridge those gaps. And I say that because I do want all of you and all these organizations and everyone to be successful, but what is your youth strategy? Do you have connections to the school districts? Do you have connections to the post-secondary? We still hear many people coming out of foundation programs who can't find jobs. We still hear from many women and Indigenous people who can't find employment. So there are opportunities. I know for plugging our own SkilledTradesBC staff here and a phone call away, we will help you. We will help find your connections to the school districts or whatever you need. But I think it's really taking a look in the mirror and thinking about what is our strategies and how are we going to do it. Because to the points that have been said, they're not going to just show up at the doorstep. So we have to do a lot more.
Good points. Wayne?
Yeah, very quickly. What I would say to this question is that I don't see that there's a lack of interest necessarily. What I see is a lack of confidence that these jobs are going to stick around for the next few decades. And I think where that comes from is that we keep seeing people talk about this transition away from our traditional sectors to something new and unknown. And fair enough, there is a transition happening and will continue to happen. But the skilled jobs that we're talking about and that are where we're experiencing the greatest labor shortages, those jobs will be there in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years. Whether you're building a new refinery or plant or building infrastructure to decarbonize it, or it's a hydrogen plant, many of those skills are the same. And so we have to be very careful about the language we use about this transition, being careful not to instill this fear in young people that, these jobs are pretty precarious, they're good, but we have to celebrate these industries. There's going to be mining in 30 years. There's going to be mining forever. There's going to be forestry forever. There's going to be oil and gas for a very long time. And so let's instill confidence that this is a very good and long career choice.
And having a skilled trade under your belt really makes the world your oyster. If you're not working in BC, you're able to travel further afield and secure really good employment, well-paying employment. So there's all kinds of reasons why our students should be embarking on skilled trades. A related question, and I'll open it up to the panel. What can rural communities do to try and recruit workers to come when they may not have considered before? I know that some of the industry players are really recruitment agents for their communities. So any thoughts on what rural communities can do particularly to entice people?
Well, I can take a stab at that. I don't know that it's the rural community's role to entice people for this purpose. It's the employers who struggle to recruit them to the local communities. I'm not sure this isn't happening naturally due to lower cost of housing in rural communities, very pleasant lifestyle in rural communities. I think that if the government could do anything to support that, it would be to give people confidence that if you do move to a rural community, that there's going to be good health care and other good services in those communities. But I see some of this happening already.
Conversation about CBAs, and I could also lean into that conversation, which I won't.
I would welcome it.
Fiona,
So,
if he kind of suggested that I was advancing a farcical argument. So can I offer a very quick rebuttal?
I was asserting that you did advance that.
Gentlemen, I would suggest that, and I'm trying not to be conflicted here because I have been in the CBA world and I do understand it. Bottom line, we want as many British Columbians, whether they are union or non-union employees, to be employed. Bottom line. And if that means reviewing the vehicles that government or governments are introducing, that's what it needs, because bottom line, we want our people employed. We want opportunities for all British Columbians and our Indigenous partners, our minority groups, barriers, restrictions, call them what you will. There's no place for them when we have so much opportunity and such a strained labor force. We need everybody to be able to work. So let's draw a line under CBAs, because it could mount into quite a long conversation, and we've got 8 minutes and 50 seconds, 49 seconds left. So, but thank you for both of your comments. I appreciate both sides. And let's move along. So with a question from Roxanne, with a stronger workforce, we see the additional need for childcare. How does industry see themselves in a position to help communities recruit ECEs, professionals, as well as encourage people to join that profession? It's not often possible to even offer them a wage that competes with industry. Good point. We touched on it a little bit earlier. Any thoughts, perhaps? Cara, do you have a perspective from a mining side? What is the mining sector doing to help address the community issues in your communities that you go into?
So I think about ESG, so environment, social, and governance. And there's mining companies that form IBAs with First Nation communities. And as part of the social piece, what are mining companies doing to support the childcare within the communities? And so that covers the social aspect of ESG, but it's a matter of thinking outside the box. How can we do that better? How can we support communities so that way there's a better quality of life for people within remote or rural First Nation communities?
Points, thank you. Where are we? Yeah, experiencing okay, here we go. Companies are experiencing economic pressures that are impacting opportunities for current and new workers, and this will continue to plague the sector during this time of intentional evolution of the natural resource economy. What would you consider the number one thing employers need to pay attention to in order to attract, retain, and support a talented workforce? I think we need to hear from all four of you on that, because there's going to be some genie wishes one more time. What are they? What are the number one things?
To me, Fiona, it comes down to creating the respectful workplaces, and it's really about benefiting everybody. It's not just about women, it's not just about Indigenous people, everyone will benefit from it. We often hear stories of people who started in skilled trades that are typical of the male, person who shouldn't have the same barriers and still walks away 5, 10 years later and goes and does something else. So thinking about that ongoing career development and creating those environments, I think, is key.
Thanks, Shelley. Patrick?
Question went away and I can't see it now.
Oh, what was the number one thing to, gosh, I've even forgotten it. Number one thing to?
Just in general?
What did you say, Shelley?
To attract and retain.
To attract, retain people into the workforce.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, it comes back to setting out the building blocks for a career. And it has to be, excellent wage, excellent pension, excellent benefits. Someone needs to look at that job opportunity and say, there's a future in it for myself, and there's a retirement with respect at the end of the day. I mean, these are the things that we have to be looking at in general terms.
Points, thank you. Cara?
I like the comment that was made earlier about telling the story. and changing the narrative. And, you know, as a northerner from Northwest Territories, the mining sector, I just was thinking, no, there's no way. I'm going to become an environmentalist and go against mining. And here I am, years later, supporting the mining sector and looking at what are the opportunities. But certainly it's about changing the story and making it more attractive to all people who are interested in different careers.
Well said, thank you. And Wayne?
I think it's as simple as treating workers like humans and honoring their dignity and coming at it with a wholesome or holistic approach to the wellness of the individual.
Well said, thank you. And I'm going to try and answer that question too. I think it's important, we spoke about telling the story of the industry. I think it's also important for employers to tell their story, meaning what is their vision? What are their values? Because the younger workforce today are looking to align with employers who are aligned with them, meaning what they stand for. We know that our young workforce is really focused on social justice, on equity. They're career-oriented. They want to know where they're going before they're there. They want to know what their career path is with you before they say yes to you. So I think there's a whole lot of stories to be told. I think individual organizations can tell theirs. I think we need to tell the story of the respective sectors, whether it be mining, construction, or others, about the opportunity for everyone, and start at an early age. Catch them at the K-12 stage. When they're fresh and they can make their own minds up then when they're 13, 14, 15 years of age. We have 3 minutes left, so I'm going to do a quick fire round again, and I'll start with you, Wayne, this time, because we always end up with you in the last seat, so we'll start with you this time. 30 seconds, what is the one key takeaway that you want the audience to take away today from the conversations that we've had?
Well, notwithstanding our exchange that got cut short, I think that it's very important for everybody to know that governments in Canada do interfere with the labor market, and they should not. And the labor shortage faced by particularly our industry is severe, and it will, it will have an impact on our ability to transition our energy, and we should all be applying pressures to governments to avoid doing that at all costs. Full stop.
Full stop, thank you. Cara.
From a training perspective, it's really meeting where learners are at. And so there may be people that are looking to transfer into other careers, but they might have transferable skills, or they may have been out of training for a number of years. And so it's really taking a step back and looking at how can we better support the people who are taking the training programs.
Thank you. Patrick?
I think to Wayne's comments, you look back in history at things like the Great Depression, and you wonder how things might have worked out had government not involved themselves in labor at times like that. So I would just kind of give some context to those comments. And if anyone in BC is interested in working on a CBA, you're more than welcome.
Thank you. And Shelley?
I would say really developing a workforce strategy and thinking about your connection to the youth, the K-12 system, all those things, and having a strong, comprehensive workplace strategy is the key to start moving things forward. And SkilledTradesBC is here to help you.
And Shelley is here to help you. Thank you. We're at the almost at the end of our session, folks, so I want to say thank you, Shelley, Patrick, Cara, and Wayne, for your insight and your perspectives on questions that I've asked you and then the questions that the audience have asked you. I told you it was going to be provocative, didn't I? Good conversation, though. Out of provocation comes understanding and tolerance and hopefully solutions at the end of the day. So with that, this brings our session to the end, and I think we're moving into a break now. Are we, Mr.